The cigarette trembled between Nguyen Van Duc's fingers as he stared at the American soldier extending a pack of Marlboros through the chain-link fence. February 15th, 1968, Camp Alpha, Siu Chi District. The sounds of helicopters chopping overhead, mixed with the acrid smell of burning fuel and the rough texture of concrete beneath his bare feet as he sat in what Americans called a temporary detention facility, a world away from the bamboo tiger cages he'd expected. This moment would shatter everything Duc believed about American brutality and reshape the psychological warfare of Vietnam in ways neither side anticipated. 3 weeks earlier, Duc had commanded a Viet Cong sapper unit that had penetrated the American firebase at Tay Ninh during the Tet Offensive. Captured after a firefight that left half his unit dead, he'd prepared himself for the torture sessions he'd heard described in political education classes. Instead, he found himself eating more food in a single American meal than his family had seen in weeks, smoking cigarettes that cost more than his father's monthly rice ration, and receiving medical treatment that surpassed anything available in North Vietnamese hospitals. The transformation began in the rice paddies outside Saigon, where Duc lay wounded with shrapnel in his leg and a bullet graze across his shoulder. As American medics approached his hiding spot, he'd bitten down on a cyanide capsule standard issue for captured Viet Cong officers. But the bitter almond taste never came. The capsule was a dud, one of thousands of defective suicide pills produced in hastily built North Vietnamese laboratories. From the captured diary of Nguyen Van Duc, discovered in 1973, the American medic spoke Vietnamese. "Don't move, we're here to help. I waited for the knife, the electrodes, the bamboo splinters under my fingernails. Instead, he gave me morphine, real morphine. The pain disappeared like mist." The medical tent where they carried Duc represented American field medicine at its peak efficiency: portable X-ray machines, sterilized surgical instruments, antibiotics that had eliminated battlefield infections, which had killed millions in previous wars. The American doctor who operated on his leg, Captain James Morrison from Detroit, used techniques and equipment that exceeded anything available in Hanoi's finest hospitals. But nothing prepared Duc for the interrogation center at Long Binh. Walking through the gates, he expected to enter a chamber of horrors described in Viet Cong propaganda leaflets. Instead, he found himself in a facility that challenged every assumption about American imperialist cruelty. Air-conditioned rooms, 3 meals daily, cigarettes provided freely, and interrogators who spoke fluent Vietnamese and treated captured soldiers with a professionalism that defied everything he'd been taught about capitalist warfare. The first meal broke his psychological defenses more effectively than any torture could have. White rice, not the brown, gritty mixture of rice and corn that sustained Viet Cong units, but polished white rice in quantities that seemed impossible. Fresh vegetables, canned meat, and milk. Real milk, not the powdered substitute that occasionally reached jungle camps. The American guards seemed embarrassed by the abundance, apologizing that the ice cream machine was broken. What would you do if everything you'd been told about your enemy's brutality proved false, replaced by a prosperity that exposed your own side's propaganda as lies? But the real revelation came with the cigarettes. American soldiers tossed packs of Marlboros, Camels, and Lucky Strikes to prisoners with casual indifference. These cigarettes, Duc realized, cost more on the black market in Saigon than most Vietnamese earned in a month. Yet American soldiers discarded half-smoked cigarettes as if they were worthless, lighting new ones from packs they carried by the dozen. The mathematics of American abundance. Through the fence of the detention center, Duc watched American soldiers loading trucks with sea rations that would be thrown away if not consumed within hours. Each individual meal contained more protein than most Vietnamese families ate in a week. The waste was strategic, demonstrating a supply system so robust that excess was preferable to shortage. The interrogation sessions themselves shattered the final remnants of his ideological conditioning. No bright lights, no torture chairs, no electrical devices. Instead, comfortable rooms where American intelligence officers offered coffee, cigarettes, and conversations that revealed their intimate knowledge of Vietnamese culture, history, and politics. These weren't the ignorant imperialists described in party literature, but educated professionals who spoke of Ho Chi Minh's poetry, debated Vietnamese independence movements, and discussed the complexities of the conflict with a sophistication that exceeded most political education sessions in Viet Cong camps. Intelligence Report, February 20th, 1968. Subject appears psychologically disoriented by standard treatment protocols. Requests confirmation that he is actually prisoner, not guest. Shows signs of ideological confusion when confronted with evidence of American knowledge of Vietnamese culture. Within 72 hours, Duc's worldview had collapsed as completely as any military position. The America he'd been taught to hate, ignorant, brutal, culturally inferior, proved to be a nation of such overwhelming resources that it could afford to treat enemies better than his own government treated its supporters. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come, waiting in the records room where American intelligence officers would show him captured documents that would expose the true mathematics of the war. The manila folder landed on the metal table with a soft thud that echoed through the air-conditioned interrogation room like a death sentence. March 3rd, 1968, Long Bin Intelligence Center. The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the smell of fresh coffee and the smooth texture of laminated documents. As American Captain Robert Hayes opened files that would destroy Nguyen Van Duc's faith in everything he'd fought. For what Duc saw in those captured North Vietnamese documents would prove more devastating than any battlefield defeat. Captain Hayes, a former professor of Asian studies at Yale who spoke Vietnamese with the fluency of a native speaker, spread photographs across the table with methodical precision. Aerial reconnaissance images of North Vietnamese supply depots revealed the truth behind the People's War, empty warehouses, skeletal truck convoys, soldiers subsisting on rice rations that would barely sustain a child. The contrast with American abundance became inescapable when Hayes opened a second folder containing routine U.S. Army supply manifests. "Your unit received how much rice per month?" Hayes asked, in perfect Vietnamese, his tone devoid of mockery. Duc stared at numbers that revealed the mathematical impossibility of North Vietnamese victory. His entire regiment of 800 men received less food monthly than a single American company of 120 soldiers consumed in a week. The C-ration cans, stacked in American mess tents, contained more meat than entire Viet Cong battalions saw in months. Captured letter from Senior Lieutenant Tran Van Minh, March 19, 1968. My dear wife, the Americans feed us 3 times daily. Not rice water, but thick soup with vegetables and meat. Yesterday they gave us chocolate, real chocolate, not the bitter bark we called chocolate in the tunnels. I am gaining weight in prison, while our comrades starve in the jungle. The psychological warfare was unintentional but devastating. American guards didn't boast about their abundance. They seemed embarrassed by it. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez from San Antonio apologized when the ice cream machine broke down, explaining that prisoners would have to wait until tomorrow for dessert. Dessert in a prison camp during wartime. The concept violated everything Duc understood about conflict and deprivation. But the real revelation came during the daily distribution of cigarettes. American soldiers received cartons monthly, 200 cigarettes per man, and treated them with the same casual indifference as Vietnamese peasants treated weeds. Guards stubbed out half-smoked Marlboros and immediately lit new ones. Cigarette butts accumulated in ashtrays like golden debris, each discarded butt worth more than most Vietnamese earned in a day. The waste transcended mere abundance. Duc watched American soldiers pour coffee down drains because it had cooled, discard entire meals because they preferred different flavors, and throw away clothing that would have been treasures in Vietnamese villages. The garbage trucks that hauled away American waste carried more valuable goods than most Viet Cong supply convoys delivered to combat units. The medical facilities shattered his final illusions about American barbarism. The camp dispensary contained medications that didn't exist in North Vietnamese hospitals, antibiotics that could cure infections that killed thousands in jungle camps, painkillers that eliminated suffering. Viet Cong soldiers endured without complaint bandages and surgical instruments that exceeded anything available in Hanoi's most prestigious medical centers. Dr. Sarah Chen, a Chinese-American physician from San Francisco, treated captured Viet Cong soldiers with the same professional care she would provide to American casualties. She performed surgery on Duc's infected shrapnel wound using equipment worth more than most Vietnamese saw in lifetimes, then prescribed medications that were literally unavailable at any price in North Vietnam. "Why do you treat enemies so well?" Duc asked through an interpreter. Dr. Chen's response, translated carefully, revealed an American mentality that contradicted every assumption about capitalist cruelty. "Because you're human beings. Because we can afford to. Because it's who we are. The Americans could afford humanity. What would you do if you discovered your enemy possessed such overwhelming resources that they could treat prisoners better than your own government treated its loyal soldiers?" The camp's recreation facilities provided the next shock. Prisoners had access to books, including Vietnamese literature, newspapers, and magazines. The library contained more volumes than most Vietnamese universities, including works by Ho Chi Minh that had been translated into English and studied by American scholars with academic rigor that exceeded most political education sessions in Viet Cong camps. American guards organized volleyball games, provided musical instruments, and allowed prisoners to form study groups. The treatment resembled a university more than a prison camp. Duc found himself attending English classes taught by American soldiers who studied Vietnamese culture with genuine intellectual curiosity, not the crude stereotypes he'd expected from imperialist occupiers. Intelligence Report, March 25, 1968. Prisoner morale management requires minimal effort. Standard treatment protocols result in voluntary compliance. Subjects express confusion about American motivations, frequently asking why enemies receive such generous treatment. Ideological resistance, decreasing markedly. The psychological transformation extended beyond individual prisoners. As word spread through the Viet Cong network about American prison conditions, surrender rates increased significantly. Veterans of American captivity described treatment that contradicted every propaganda narrative about American brutality. Captured soldiers returned to North Vietnamese units, reporting abundance that seemed impossible, humanity that defied ideological categories. The turning point came when Duc received mail from home letters that revealed the true cost of North Vietnam's war effort. His village had been reduced to subsistence survival while he lived in American captivity with better food, medical care, and living conditions than he'd known as a free man. The irony was inescapable. Imprisonment by America provided better life than freedom under Ho Chi Minh. But the most devastating revelation was still coming, hidden in the camp's operational procedures that would expose the true scale of American industrial capacity and the mathematical impossibility of North Vietnamese victory. The clipboard in Lieutenant Colonel William Patterson's hands contained numbers that would have been dismissed as propaganda if any North Vietnamese intelligence officer had intercepted them. April 7, 1968. Camp Alpha Logistics Center. The steady drone of air conditioning mixed with the scent of mimeograph ink and the crisp texture of fresh carbon copies as Patterson reviewed supply requisitions that revealed the true scale of American industrial dominance. These routine logistics reports would prove more psychologically devastating to captured Viet Cong than any battlefield victory. Before we dive deeper into this incredible transformation, I want to know, where are you watching this from? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and let us know. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I am, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible untold stories from history. Now, back to Vietnam, where mathematics was rewriting the psychology of war. Patterson's monthly requisition for a single detention facility exceeded the annual budget of most North Vietnamese military districts. Camp Alpha consumed 17,000 gallons of fuel, weekly enough to power the entire Viet Cong motor pool for 6 months. The facility's electrical consumption in one day surpassed what most Vietnamese villages used in a year. Yet this was considered a minor installation in the American logistics network, barely worthy of mention in Pentagon reports. Nguyen Van Duc discovered these numbers not through espionage, but through casual conversation with American guards who discussed logistics with the same indifference that Vietnamese peasants discussed weather. Sergeant Mike O'Brien from Boston mentioned that his unit threw away more food waste daily than Duke's entire regiment had received in monthly rations. This wasn't boasting, it was complaint about the inefficiency of military procurement. From the Journal of Captain Robert Hayes, intelligence officer, prisoner psychological profiles show consistent pattern: initial disbelief, followed by depression, as they comprehend the mathematical impossibility of North Vietnamese victory. Duke spent 3 hours staring at our supply manifest. When asked what troubled him, he replied, "We are fighting the ocean with buckets." The revelation that devastated Duke most completely came during a routine medical examination. Dr. Chen mentioned casually that the antibiotics she'd used to treat his infected wound cost $12 per dose, more than most Vietnamese families earned in 3 months. The X-ray machine in the camp dispensary cost $40,000, enough to purchase equipment for an entire North Vietnamese field hospital. Yet this was standard medical equipment in every American military facility. The Americans weren't just wealthy, they were wealthy beyond Vietnamese comprehension. Camp Alpha's telephone system connected directly to the United States through satellite links that cost more hourly than most Viet Cong units received in annual funding. Prisoners could observe American soldiers calling home to discuss family problems, baseball scores, and weekend plans with the same casual frequency that Vietnamese used to report military emergencies. The technology that enabled these calls represented industrial capabilities that North Vietnam couldn't match in decades. The psychological impact extended beyond individual prisoners to the broader intelligence network. Through prisoner exchanges and releases, word spread throughout Viet Cong units about American prison conditions that contradicted every propaganda narrative. Veterans of American captivity described treatment that seemed impossible, abundance that defied ideological categories, and technology that revealed the true balance of power. What would you do if you realized your entire revolutionary struggle was mathematically futile before it began? The camp's waste management system provided daily demonstrations of American excess. Garbage trucks hauled away tons of discarded materials, clothing worth more than Vietnamese soldiers' annual pay, food that could feed villages, equipment that exceeded anything available in North Vietnamese hospitals. American soldiers discarded items that would have been treasures in Vietnamese communities, then complained about military inefficiency. Duke began keeping a secret journal, documenting the mathematical realities of American power. A single American helicopter cost more than the annual budget of his home province. The fuel consumed by American jets in one mission exceeded what his entire regiment received in monthly allocations. The ammunition expended in routine training exercises surpassed what major Viet Cong operations used in months of combat. The numbers revealed a war that was already over. The camp's recreation facilities demonstrated American wealth through casual amenities. Prisoners had access to sports equipment, musical instruments, books, and games that exceeded what most Vietnamese had known in peacetime. The library contained more volumes than universities in Hanoi, including extensive collections of Vietnamese literature translated into English and studied by American scholars with academic rigor. American guards organized entertainment that seemed surreal in a military context. Movie nights showed Hollywood films that revealed American living standards, impossible to fake suburban homes with multiple cars, families with abundant food, cities blazing with electricity. These weren't propaganda films, but routine entertainment, depicting American normalcy that exceeded Vietnamese dreams of prosperity. Intelligence Assessment, April 22, 1968. Psychological warfare through abundance proving more effective than traditional interrogation methods. Prisoners voluntarily providing intelligence in exchange for confirmation that observed American capabilities are genuine. Request guidance on managing ideological collapse syndrome among captured personnel. The transformation of prisoner attitudes created unexpected intelligence opportunities. Captured Viet Cong officers began asking detailed questions about American industrial capacity, agricultural production, and technological capabilities. They sought confirmation that the abundance they witnessed was real, not elaborate deception designed to demoralize prisoners. Dr. Chen found herself conducting informal seminars on American medicine, describing surgical techniques and pharmaceutical developments that exceeded anything available in Asia. Her casual mention of heart transplant surgery, performed routinely in American hospitals, caused Duc to request writing materials. He spent days composing letters to his family, describing medical miracles that seemed like science fiction. The mail system itself revealed American organizational capabilities that dwarfed Vietnamese comprehension. Letters from prisoners reached families in North Vietnam faster through American military postal services than correspondence traveled between Vietnamese military units. The efficiency exposed the primitive state of North Vietnamese communications infrastructure. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come, hidden in the camp's operational procedures that would demonstrate American industrial capacity operating at a fraction of its potential. The typewriter keys struck the paper with mechanical precision as Nguyen Van Duc composed his final letter from Camp Alpha on June 12, 1968. The steady clacking of keys mixed with the scent of cigarette smoke and the smooth texture of American stationery as he wrote words that would transform him from captured enemy to unwitting ambassador of reconciliation. This letter would plant seeds of transformation that would bloom decades after the last American helicopter lifted off from Saigon. Duc's correspondence, like that of thousands of other Viet Cong prisoners, carried more than personal messages. It transported evidence of American abundance into the heart of North Vietnamese resistance networks. Each letter describing prison camp conditions contradicted years of anti-American propaganda, creating cognitive dissonance that spread through jungle encampments like psychological wildfire. Final letter from Nguyen Van Duc to his family, June 12, 1968. My beloved wife and children, I write this with a heavy heart, not from suffering, but from understanding. The Americans have treated me better than our own government treats its heroes. I have eaten meat daily, received medicine that saved my life, and learned that everything we believed about our enemy was a lie constructed by men who never faced their abundance. The repatriation process itself demonstrated American organizational capabilities that dwarfed Vietnamese comprehension. Processing centers efficiently managed thousands of prisoner exchanges with medical examinations, documentation, and logistics that exceeded anything North Vietnamese forces had achieved in major military operations. Red Cross officials supervised transfers with precision that revealed international humanitarian systems operating beyond Vietnamese political frameworks. Dr. Chen's final medical examination of Duc revealed the physical transformation that paralleled his psychological evolution. The malnourished guerrilla fighter who had arrived weighing 98 pounds now departed at 135 pounds, healthier than when he joined the Viet Cong 3 years earlier. His medical records, meticulously maintained by American personnel, documented treatment that exceeded care available to North Vietnamese generals. The irony was complete. American imprisonment had restored his health, while Vietnamese liberation had destroyed it. Camp Alpha's closing ceremony in July 1968 marked the end of more than a detention facility. It represented the conclusion of an unintended experiment in psychological warfare through prosperity. As prisoners prepared for repatriation, American officers distributed personal items that revealed the casual generosity defining American abundance: cigarettes, clothing, books, and letters of recommendation for future employment. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson's final report contained statistics that would have been dismissed as propaganda if intercepted by North Vietnamese intelligence. The camp had processed over 3,000 prisoners, with a mortality rate lower than most American civilian hospitals. Medical treatment had cost more per prisoner than North Vietnam spent annually on entire military districts. The facility had consumed resources that could have supplied a Vietnamese division for months. What would you do if you returned home to find your own countrymen living in conditions worse than enemy prison camps? The returnees carried more than physical evidence of American abundance. They transported psychological proof that the war's fundamental premises were false. Veterans of American captivity described treatment that contradicted every ideological assumption about capitalist brutality. Their testimonies created ripple effects throughout Viet Cong networks, undermining morale and revolutionary commitment in ways no military defeat could achieve. Tran Van Minh, repatriated in August 1968, found his home village devastated by war, while he had gained weight in American custody. His family subsisted on rice water, while he had consumed chocolate, meat, and fresh vegetables daily as a prisoner. The mathematical impossibility of victory became personal when he compared his family's wartime suffering with his treatment by supposed enemies. The psychological transformation transcended individual cases to affect broader strategic calculations. Intelligence reports documented increasing surrender rates following prisoner exchanges, as word spread about American prison conditions that exceeded North Vietnamese military standards. Combat units experienced desertion. Increases as veterans of American captivity described treatment that made continued fighting seem pointless. Dr. Chen's post-war analysis, published in 1975, documented the unintended consequences of humanitarian treatment during wartime. American adherence to Geneva Convention standards had created psychological warfare more effective than any propaganda campaign. By treating enemies humanely, America had demonstrated the prosperity and values that made its system attractive to those fighting against it. Intelligence Assessment, September 19, 1968. Prisoner repatriation programs inadvertently creating pro-American sentiment among former Viet Cong personnel. Returnees reporting American abundance and humanitarian treatment inconsistent with revolutionary ideology. Recommend monitoring psychological impact on unit morale and combat effectiveness. The long-term consequences extended far beyond immediate military effects. Many former prisoners became advocates for post-war reconciliation, carrying positive impressions of American society that would influence Vietnam's eventual diplomatic normalization. Duc himself would later work as a translator for American humanitarian organizations, applying English learned during captivity to facilitate reconstruction efforts. The camp's legacy lived on through personal relationships that transcended political boundaries. Dr. Chen maintained correspondence with former patients for decades, providing medical advice and assistance that extended American influence through humanitarian rather than military channels. Her Christmas cards to Vietnamese families created connections that survived political upheaval and ideological transformation. The most profound transformation occurred not in prison camps, but in villages where returnees shared their experiences. Stories of American abundance, technological capability, and humanitarian treatment created cognitive dissonance that undermined revolutionary commitment. The psychological impact rippled through extended families and communities, generating doubt about official propaganda and war aims. Humanity had defeated ideology through mathematics. By war's end in 1975, over 50,000 Viet Cong prisoners had experienced American detention facilities. Their collective testimony created a parallel narrative about American society that contradicted official propaganda. These unwitting ambassadors carried knowledge of American prosperity, technology, and values back into Vietnamese society, planting seeds of reconciliation that would bloom in future decades. The final irony emerged years later, as Vietnam pursued economic reforms modeled partly on American capitalism. Former prisoners who had experienced American abundance became advocates for market economics and international integration. Duc's son would later study at an American university, financed partly by scholarship funds established by Dr. Chen and other veterans who remembered their Vietnamese patients. The story of Viet Cong prisoners in American camps reveals a profound truth about the nature of ideological conflict. Sometimes the most effective weapon against extremism is not violence, but prosperity. Not hatred, but humanity. Not propaganda, but the simple demonstration of a society confident enough in its values to treat enemies with dignity. In treating captured enemies better than their own government treated loyal soldiers, America won a victory, more complete than any battlefield triumph. The transformation of enemy minds through the overwhelming evidence of democratic abundance. The prisoners returned home, not as hardened revolutionaries, but as witnesses to an alternative vision of human possibility. Their story stands as testament to the power of prosperity over propaganda, humanity over hatred, and the strange mathematics of war, where treating enemies well can prove more devastating than treating them brutally. In the end, America's secret weapon in Vietnam was not superior firepower, but the simple, overwhelming evidence of what free people could accomplish when they chose creation over destruction. The cigarettes, the medical care, the abundant food, all were unintended instruments of psychological transformation that would outlast the war itself, carried in the memories of men who came as enemies and left as witnesses to a different way of life.